In this session, I want to share at least my 10 tips when using Microsoft 365, and it's basically EMS together with Office 365, and that goes often hand in hand together with Windows 10. So I want to first cover a little bit about identity, conditional access, resource access, and app management. So how are we able to publish internal resources to our mobile devices, for instance, and a little bit about MDM and modern management, which, and definitely modern management is very hot lately with Windows 10 and the modern way of managing those devices. So, but let's first start with the identity-related tips. And number one is that when you start a project like this, you need to choose the right identity model. And for new startups, you may want to only have the cloud identity, which is basically just the identity in the cloud. It's in Azure and nothing else, so you don't have anything on premises. A more common scenario is that you synchronize your on-premises identities from Active Directory towards your Azure tenant, towards your Azure AD. And that can be done with or without synchronizing the password hash. And there are also new features coming that you also have passwordless login with Windows Hello for Business and more modern way of authentication. And next we have the federated identity, and this is pretty common in the larger enterprises where companies are a little bit afraid to synchronize the password hash towards the cloud, and they want to handle all authentication on premises against the local Active Directory. And then we are able to federate the local Active Directory with Azure AD. So what happens if somebody goes to outlook.office.com, fills in their email address, it will be redirected on premises where they authenticate, and then if it's successful, it receives a token which allows access or not. So that's a good start, and it's different per company. One side note is that Microsoft is really focusing on cloud and not really investing in the federation space of when talking about identity. You see more and more features of ADFS, which is Active Directory Federation Services, also moving towards Azure AD. So you can maybe see that in the foreseeable future they can provide the same experience fully in the cloud or via the cloud. So another part when talking about identity is that you might want to not synchronize the complete Active Directory. Of course, if you are fully onto Office 365, you want to synchronize all the identities with a mailbox, so you can populate a global address list more easily. But service accounts, your domain admins, you may not want to synchronize them to the Azure Active Directory if you have a mixed model. Same counts for groups. You can do that in the beginning when configuring Azure AD Connect, but you can also fine-tune it afterwards. A question for you. How many global admins do you have? Or at least, how many of you are using Office 365? Almost everybody. And how many global admins do you have in your company? 2? 1? 5? 4? That's all awesome numbers. I did a review late last year in an American financial company, and they have had 54 global admins. And do they need them all? No. There are ways to work around that. But basically, the best practice of Microsoft is to use up to 5 global admins. And of those 5, put 1 or 2 in the password vault. You never touch, only when when you really need it, when you don't have access anymore throughout the other accounts. So by lowering the amount of global admins, use the role-based administration model, because it's getting more and more roles are being added almost every day. Around Ignite, I think maybe 10 new roles appeared around Teams and other services. So if you're not already doing this, have a look at the role-based administration model. And if you work with a lot of contractors, I'm a contractor, consultant, and I don't want to have a global admin account in my customer. So I only want to have access where I need to have access for. So if I, for instance, want to have global admin, my feeling is that it needs to be an automated process, that I'm only having that role for maybe 1 hour without any user interference, or that somebody needs to put me in a group. So for this, they have Azure Privilege Identity Management, where you basically request a role in the service, and then after it's being approved, you will have the privileges of a global admin or an Intune service admin for a specific time. And then afterwards, you're back to having a user, back to a normal user. And this way also, when you have a large enterprise, the global admins are often the accounts the hackers want to attack, because if they are able to breach a global admin, then you're basically God in an environment. The third tip around identity, use identity protection. And the same as with privileged identity management and identity protection, they are both E5 features, so that can often be a blocker for a lot of companies. But basically what identity protection does is it monitoring your identities for risks. For instance, are your accounts enabled for MFA, for multi-factor authentication? Am I logging in here now from Utrecht, and in 5 minutes or 5 seconds I'm also logging in from China? With Azure AD, you're able to identify that, and that's also being done in the normal licenses. You can report it, but with identity protection you can put an action on it. So if somebody has stolen my credentials and tries to log in from China, it will be popped up for MFA or blocked access, instead of allowing access. So let's have a look at how this looks like. So if we first look at the identity protection, the end user experience, I'm logging in with Kenny at emskings.com. with the right password. And I just receive access. If I now start a Thor browser, which is basically a browser using anonymous proxy service around the world, the experience should be different. So this takes a little while. So let's quickly start. Also looking at the back end while we wait until the Thor browser starts. With identity protection, you also have a clear view on how your identities are doing, quote unquote, in your environment. So in my environment, it's really bad. I have maybe 17 users and they're all at risk. Basically because I haven't configured any multi-factor authentication. And yeah, so this gives you visibility, and you can also create actions on it. So if I start the Thor browser and go to the same page, outlook.office.com. Takes a little bit longer because it's using some dodgy. Okay, so PowerShell of JavaScript is not enabled. Let's try again. Ooh, let's try this another way. As a backup. Apparently they also remove features from... so this is a server somewhere in Azure, and hopefully it will give us the same experience, because I'm not able to travel that quickly. Office.com. And of course, this is a server. Okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead and let me see if this is... No. That's a bad thing of consuming things out of the cloud, because this is also an auto-updating app. So let's move on. What's going to happen is that I was going to be prompted for MFA, and then touching the telephone, entering a code, then I would allow access. But you can fully control this in the back end. And if we look at some vulnerabilities of the past, let's see, risk events, then you will receive errors like this: impossible travel to an atypical location. For privileged identity management, we are able to, for instance, this is a temporary administrator, and if we have a look, then I don't have any roles currently assigned, but I'm entitled or allowed to use 2 roles: the Intune Service Administrator or the Device Administrator. So if I want to temporarily have Intune Service Administrator permissions, then I can click here on Activate. And then, of course, I need to verify my identification. And then, hopefully, I will be called.
Thank you for using the Microsoft Sign-In Verification System. Please press the pound key to finish your verification. Your sign-in was successfully verified. Goodbye.
So I'm allowed to the portal again and to use this feature. And then I'm able to click the Activate button, and then I'm able to configure a start time. For instance, if I need to do something out of office hours on Saturday, then I can configure, okay, on Saturday I want to have access for up to 4 hours because I'm executing a change. Let us put it here, and then up to 4 hours. And then I'm requesting to activate this role for me. So currently I'm still not having this role assigned. So if we switch back to this console with the full admin right, Peter minus admin, and go to the privileged identity section. And then we will approve requests. Then we will see the request being added. So in this case, I can open the request and approve or deny. So if I click approve, they say go ahead. Click approve. And then the rule will be added for, in this case, 4 hours to my other user account. So if we switch back again, with the right one. And if we go to Azure Active Directory, this is another way of looking up the role assignments. And then we see that it's a global admin, but let's go back to the so active role, it's Intune Service Admin is being added now until tonight, 7/17. So this is a good way to temporarily give high privileged access to services in your tenant. And this is not only for Intune. We have a lot of new roles being added. If we talk about a role-based administration, have a look here, and almost every service you can give access globally from here. For instance, if you want to use more granular access in Exchange or Intune, Exchange and Intune also have their own role-based administration model. So you're pretty flexible. So next, I want to cover a little bit about conditional access, because when moving to the cloud, you want to protect your data. Where we used to protect our data by building a fence around our data center, we need to come up with something else. And we can do this with device and app-based conditional access. With device-based conditional access, we can check the status of the device. For instance, if a PIN is configured, if it's enrolled, if it's compliant or not. With app-based conditional access, we can control what app is being used to access, for instance, Exchange Online. Microsoft have a lot of approved apps. Currently, you're not able to add your own apps to that list, but basically with the Office Suite and Outlook, you're able to narrow the scope of apps being used to access the environment. If you're using Office 365 and conditional access, take a look also at your legacy protocols like POP, EMAP, EWS, because they use often legacy authentication, or apps are using legacy authentication, and legacy authentication is not being targeted for conditional access, only modern authentication. So for instance, if you have an old Outlook app on Mac, which is using EWS with legacy authentication, then you can basically bypass conditional access if you don't do anything about this. So you can do this on Exchange, but nowadays there's also control in conditional access, which is still in preview. Knowing this, Microsoft is deprecating legacy authentication in the future on Exchange Online, but also other services in Office 365. So if you have a lot of third-party applications using EWS with legacy authentication, then go talk with your vendors that they need to come up with a solution before 2020. If you still have conditional access version 1 policies active, move them towards the version 2 to the new portal.azure.com, because the old ones are read-only. You're not able to change them anymore. They still work, but in V2 you're able to do more, to check more, and this is the way to go. if you want to enhance the compliance, basically with basic settings within Intune, we're able to check if certain things around the security of the device, if it's encrypted or if it's jailbroken or rooted. With mobile threat protection of Lookout for Work, Symantec's Checkpoint Superior, but also Windows Defender ATP, we're able to do much more based on checking of the device, of the apps, and the other threats on the device. And if a threat is found, for instance, with Windows Defender ATP, the device is marked as not compliant, and you're not able to use that device to read your mail in Office 365. So if we look at conditional access, it's part of Azure AD. And in the beginning, if you played with Microsoft Intune in the period that the Silverlight portal was there, you know that there were also 3 options to provide conditional access. That's all being moved to Azure AD. So basically, you need to have an Azure AD premium license to use conditional access in a full environment. So how does a conditional access rule looks like? Let's have a look at this internal website, which I will be demoing in the next demo. So in this case, we target this conditional access rule to all users, and we select only one cloud app. I often get in this case, this rule is especially for this cloud app, but I often get the question, why not block or control all cloud apps? You can do that, but if you look up the best practices of Microsoft, then a rule with all cloud apps, all users, they say stay away from that, because the chance that you lock yourself out is really big. If you don't exclude, for instance, the 1 or 2 global admins that are in the password vault. Yeah, so be careful with conditional access, because it's really powerful. So we control one app. This is EMS Kings, which I will explain later on. And then we basically want to control traffic which comes from the browser or a modern app. And this can come from all platforms. Doesn't really matter, Android, iOS, or Windows Phone if somebody has it. And we want to grant access under certain conditions. And basically now we want to require the device to be marked as compliant, which basically means it needs to be managed through Intune and it needs to be compliant. And we want to use the required client app. And this is basically the app-based conditional access part. And this is a list which is currently supported for app-based conditional access. So, and we choose the require all selected controls. So both needs to be fine before we get access. So if we look at resource access and app tips, then Intune provides app configuration, which is especially currently for iOS and Android applications, where we basically are able to configure applications. And first of all, the app needs to support the app config, and you need to know how to configure those apps. And as a community for this, set up, appconfig.com. I will look it up later and add it to the slide deck. And there you find all the apps, and you can learn how to configure those. Both are supported by enrolled devices. If you have a device which is managed by Intune, or a device which is not managed through Intune. And this is basically when we are using Intune to manage only the application. For instance, we allow access to our Exchange online environment only by using the Outlook app, and without needing to control the complete device. We just want to control the data. And of course, we want to check a little bit if a device is jailbroken or not, but for the rest, we only care about the data. And that's also being supported by Intune. So how are we publishing or giving access to internal resources? And this was always a huge gap between, if you had a comparison between Mobile Iron or AirWatch and Intune. With the Azure AD application proxy, we're able to basically install a connector on premises, and by configuring an application in Azure where we provide the internal URL of the resource and an external URL, we're able to publish an internal resource through the application proxy. A good thing about this is this connector only needs outbound connections. So we don't need to really open firewalls inside of our environment, only outgoing traffic. So set up a session towards the Azure AD service. Some advantages of using this. We can use it in either just publish internal websites without any pre-authentication. For instance, for NDES publishing, but we can also use it with pre-authentication. And then also things like DDoS prevention are there out of the box because, the Azure service is pretty good secured for DDoS attacks. It integrates with the managed browser. It integrates with conditional access, and we can configure certain websites you want to publish, but you can also provide wildcard access to more sites in one application. So if we put everything together, let's first look at the app management part. This is the Intune portal. Let's also start to zoom it. If we go to client apps, we have the app configuration policies. And here I have one configuration policy that configures the managed browser. And you see that in this case, I configure a setting. Let's make it a little bit better to see. That app proxy redirection is set to true. I will show later on what this means. I can set default homepage and some favorites, so I can configure in this. This app supports those configurations. Other apps will maybe support different configurations. I target this to two apps: the managed browser for iOS and a managed browser for Android. And then with app protection policies, I'm able to control what's happening with my data. The managed browser is a browser that supports app protection policies, the so-called mobile application management policies. So if I open one and I see that the targeted apps, that also the managed browser is listed here somewhere. over here. And all those apps are being targeted with settings like, okay, I want to prevent my data to be automatically backed up to the iCloud or via iTunes. And I want to be able to control where my data is going. So in this case, I'm able to configure that only data in my managed apps, I can only share it with other apps that are being managed by the same policy. So if I have an app what is not being managed, for instance, a native mail client, I'm not able to copy and paste in between or transfer attachments to the native mail client. I am, however, able to receive data in this app. And this is all configurable, so I'm also able to block or choose only the managed apps. And further, I'm able to control things like, okay, before accessing the app, I want to have a separate PIN code. If you ever bring your own device, you don't control the PIN on the device, then you want to lock the app down so that your kids are not able to browse or send corporate emails or send emails with your corporate account. So it's also supporting facial recognition, etc., etc. And we can control, for instance, when we have a maximum wrong PIN attempts, that we automatically wipe the data, or if you have a jailbroken or rooted device, that also directly the corporate data is being wiped without touching the complete device. So we have seen the conditional access part, we have seen the app manage part. So now let's look at how to really publish the app, and that we do in Azure AD. So if we go to the enterprise, let's click correctly, enterprise applications, then the EMS Kings application will show up as the same application I use for the conditional access. And here we should have the application proxy logged in with the wrong administrator. So if we switch to the right one, then we have EMS Kings again. And I have the application proxy tab is enabled. And here we can see that my internal URL, I've published a website on my domain controller in my lab. Don't do this at home, but for test purposes it works. And here below you see the public URL, which can be used. You can use the by Microsoft provided domain name, or you can use your own verified domain names, but then you need to add your own certificates. Because this is always, when using pre-authentication, it's always secure. So you're not able to put a website publicly through port 80 if it needs to be done with pre-authentication. So here we can choose either Azure Active Directory pre-authentication, which means that before I access the EMS Kings minus EMS Kings msappproxy.net, I need to authenticate with my user before I can access this. And I'm able, if you have a website, then you can translate internal URLs, etc., etc. So this is all from the back-end side. Let's quickly have a look at the end-user experience. let's see, yep, it switches. So what happens if I use the native mail browser, the native browser, and try to access EMS Kings minus EMS Kings? I get prompted to log in. So if I log in with kenny@emskings.com and paste in my password, then we will see that I'm only allowed to access this service by using the managed browser. So if you don't have the managed browser installed, you get a button that redirects you to the App Store. In this case, it's already installed, so I get a button to open it in the browser. It's protected via my PIN, or in this case, the fingerprint. And you see that with single sign-on, I'm automatically opening the internal resource. If we look at the browser, you also see that I have configured the bookmarks. So what happens if somebody, this is an internal website, and somebody tries to forward the internal website to a colleague via email? So in the next example, I open the internal URL. Let's close this one. Then we might see it, otherwise it's going very quickly. So I click on this link, and the browser crashes, which is always good. And then you see that without knowing the external URL, it's automatically being redirected to the external URL. So basically the integration, the setting I configured earlier, which I pointed out was set to true. This takes care of with the integration in the managed browser. So if an internal use of a URL is being used, then it's the browser is able to look up the external URL very quickly and provide access to the internal resources. And again, with single sign-on. So for the last 5 minutes, let's have some quick MDM tips. If you manage Android, you might know this statement of Google. They are deprecating the Android legacy management, where if you enroll your device, the company portal or any other MDM wants to be the device administrator. Android or /Google is moving towards Android Enterprise as the new of the next MDM management. So currently, Intune is supporting 2 scenarios, where we have the bring your own scenario with Android Enterprise, which was Android for Work in the beginning. If you configure this and the user enrolls their device, then a work profile is being created, and the separation of private and work is pretty solid. Also, good for GDPR things. The second scenario currently supported is the COSU scenario, which is basically a kiosk device. It needs to be enrolled out of the box, like any corporate-owned device, like Windows and iOS. Can be enrolled through NFC, QR, and Android Zero Touch. And other scenarios are being added in the near future. So if you want to migrate or start a new project, always use Android Enterprise, because for bring your own scenarios, the impact is not really big. Of course, the user needs to unenroll and re-enroll. But if you want to use one of those scenarios, Kozu, and the newer ones coming up, you need to factory reset the device before you're able to enroll your device again, because that's being done in the out-of-the-box experience. Tip 9 is a little bit the same, but then for iOS devices. Also, Apple is more and more moving towards the supervised mode, the corporate-owned devices. And you see a lot of settings moving towards supervised mode. Two ways of getting a device supervised. One is by buying a device through the Apple device enrollment program, and the other way is attaching a device to a Mac and then configure the device to be in supervised mode with the Apple configurator. And this also requires the factory reset. For Windows 10, we have AutoPilot. My say is start evaluating. It's not the full solution like presented last year. It's the bootstrapper of the out-of-the-box experience. It allows you to do certain things, to remove local admin permissions after a device is being joined to Azure AD. And it integrates with Intune, with SCCM and any other third-party MDM like Mobile Iron, AirWatch. And basically how this works is you buy a device from the OEM. The OEM will take care of uploading the device IDs to the AutoPilot service. And then for the administrator side, the synchronization with the Intune service is taking place. The device will be available in the Intune console. If you need to configure the AutoPilot profile, and then the user is able to enroll the device themselves. That's the theory. And then if you have existing devices managed by SCCM, for instance, you're able to harvest those IDs and put them also in the AutoPilot service. So in the last seconds, quickly want to show the integration before opening for questions. If we go to device enrollment, and then to Android enrollment, Android Enterprise, where you are able to create a profile with the token, and that token needs to be used while enrolling the device. So if we have a look here, you can either share the token or share the unique QR code which needs to be used while enrolling the device, while configuring the device after enabling it for the first time. So with that, to finish up, if you have IDs, share your IDs with user voice. The product teams of Microsoft Intune and Configuration Manager are actively using this as a source of IDs or sometimes bugs which are shared. You're able to vote on existing IDs. And you see, if you join us the 6th, then David James will share also metrics on how many user voice items they solved in the past years. So then I'm open for questions, and I would like to thank you very much for your time.